The best way to set up an amazing 2025 is to first understand the year that you just had. If you're not exactly happy with the way 2024 turned out, you're not alone. Sometimes dissatisfaction is a sign that we're not living our purpose. So what's holding us back from living with purpose? And how can we design a life that truly feels like ours? Let's talk about it. In my case, 2024 started off all wrong. My divorce was recently finalized, and then I ended up losing my job. And it was devastating. If you've watched any of our videos, you know that I love what I do, and I'm extremely passionate about my work. And while losing my job in some ways was the best thing that's ever happened to me, and we'll talk more about that, in many ways, and in ways that I really haven't admitted out loud, it was also, frankly, horrible. It happened in Q1 of 2024, and there were so many positive outcomes from it. And I am the kind of person who likes to focus on the positive, but I'm not going to truly learn what I needed to learn if I can't reflect back on the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so while losing my job meant that I could make this extremely amazing pivot that you're seeing here on She Makes It Work, and it also meant that I had the opportunity to get some time and distance and space to truly understand what was going wrong. Because the moment I found out that I was losing my job, yes, I cried a lot, but I hung up the phone. And my first thought was, this isn't working for me anymore. I had to hold on to that thought over and over and over again, because my habit and my instinct told me to just get back on the same horse. I wasn't meant to ride that horse anymore. It wasn't meant for me. And it was so interesting because I had to process the emotions of what happened while also making decisions to start a new business and move forward with a new direction in my life, which I'm so grateful that I did. But I also had to look back and understand, why wasn't it working for me anymore? And why was I holding on for so long? Because it hadn't been working for a while. And I'd been getting warning signs for about a year and a half that this just wasn't for me anymore. The company I was working for was going through some really serious changes. And I am, by nature, a loyal and frankly stubborn person. And so I was holding on with both fists, even when I was seeing all the signs that we were moving in different directions. Recently, you saw a video where I talk about how much passion I have for client service. I love helping my clients. I can't think of anything I enjoy more than that, to be honest. But I had made a decision to accept a position that wasn't focused and measured on client service. So I had agreed to do something that wasn't aligned with what was in my heart. That misalignment caused me to show up in ways where I wasn't my best self, because I wasn't doing the work that I truly believed in. And it was really obvious that I didn't believe in it. And me not being my best self when I was in a leadership position impacted other people. So one of the things I did with, frankly, this gift of having this unanticipated change was to really dig deep and understand, where did I go wrong? Where did I get misaligned with what mattered the most to me? How far back did that go? And what did I need to be doing differently? I'm building a new life for myself right now, but in order to build that new life, I need to understand what happened in the old one. So the process I go through is a process of super deep reflection. And at the end of the year, I always reflect back on the previous year and take my lessons learned, check in with myself, and then move forward with that into the next year. But there's two things that are different about that this year. One, I've actually been doing that for the last 8 months, ever since I lost my job. And two, I had to admit that in some ways that process wasn't working for me anymore, or else I wouldn't have gotten so misaligned. Because what happened was, instead of following my own North Star, I set a North Star that other people had asked me to do. And here's where it's really easy to lose yourself, which is that part of my purpose is in being of service to other people. So if someone says, we need you to do X, I'm here for that, and I show up for it. But I did lose myself in the process, because I was trying so hard to be what other people needed me to be. I forgot that I needed to be doing what was right for me every single day, and we all do. And there were, as I mentioned, a few times where I kind of had these wake-up calls where I'm like, this isn't right for me. But I kind of shoved those thoughts down, and I gaslit myself because I truly enjoyed so many of the people I was working with, and I truly loved that I was helping people do things that they needed to do, which is my service component. But it went deeper than just taking a role that wasn't a perfect fit for me. And this is part of the reason I'm so passionate about fit, is when you realize something's not a good fit, you can just change direction at any time. And I didn't. So that's another lesson I've learned the hard way that I keep going back to, which is listening to your gut and also being okay with moving on when something wasn't a good fit. But I didn't. And it was because I had convinced myself that to reach some of the life goals that I had, including financial goals about supporting my family, I needed to keep progressing on a certain path. And it's really interesting because in my early 30s, which is a very long time ago, I had previously rejected the same path. I had made a decision, which was very wise at the time, which is that I don't want to have to become a different person in order to reach certain levels of success. And that was the right decision. But what happened this time is that I did want to keep growing, not just financially, but also in terms of responsibility and my skill sets. And I knew my skill set had outgrown the level I was at. So the obvious answer is, well, then reach for the next level. And I had stopped asking myself, is that right for me? And when it started to become apparent that it just wasn't right for me, I was acting out of alignment with myself. I was so stressed out all the time. I didn't stop and reevaluate that path. And at some point, that decision was made for me. It's really hard to balance. I'm grateful for that. And it was the right thing with, my goodness, that was horribly traumatic, right? But both things are true. What's interesting is I never actually intentionally chose a corporate career. So I'm gonna go way back now. I was actually raised by, I would say I was raised by wolves, but the reality is I was raised by a single father. My parents were what I'd like to call poorly reformed hippies, maybe. So they really believed in this free lifestyle. But when my dad ended up with the responsibility of raising me on his own, he chose, wow, I'm realizing the parallel here. He chose to kind of buckle down and get a job that didn't suit him in order to be financially responsible to raise a child. And I saw his struggles with that. I saw his struggles with living a life that he didn't want. And I saw his struggles with us still never really having enough money to do all the things that you see people doing growing up. And I had made the decision at a young age, I will do whatever it takes to support myself. I will do whatever I have to do to build the life that I want. And at some point you learn that that means you can't pursue necessarily an artistic life, or, there's just certain choices you need to make. This was the conventional wisdom at the time. Because remember, I'm Gen X, right? So I was raised by the boomer generation where at some point growing up meant you had to accept the realities of the world. So when the technology boom happened in the 90s, I started working in technology because it was fun and challenging and interesting. And then I realized it was also lucrative. But that wasn't what I went to school for. My degree's in psychology. And so it feels like I never sat down and intentionally chose anything. As much as I'm a huge planner, I kind of kept rolling with the punches. I started working in tech. I moved from California to Texas. I continued my technology career, and at some point realized that the tech challenges were fun. I'd reached somewhat the pinnacle of my mastery of that craft. And having worked in the consulting world, when I made my pivot, I went from technology to technology leadership, and then I pivoted into consulting, and here was something where I loved it. I could be of service, I could leverage my problem-solving skills, but being in consulting, and especially in consulting leadership, often means putting on a little bit of artificiality in the process, because you have to be what your client needs and you have to fit in with your client culture. And so I was moving further and further away from myself to fit in with my company's leadership expectations and every client's expectation that I worked with. So it was really interesting because I got a lot of credit for being authentic when really I was still showing up as myself in some ways, but only in the ways that were socially acceptable. Because when you're working in leadership in corporate America, as much as they tell you to be authentic and they tell you to be vulnerable, it's only in the ways that are okay to them. And you still have to fit in. And I wasn't raised the way they were. I didn't grow up in this white collar environment the way most of my peers did. So I spent, very transparently, my entire career feeling like I was a fraud and learning social skills that I didn't have on the fly and learning to be this chameleon while also trying to retain this strong sense of self. And so it's really interesting because everybody who works with me would say, well, Gabby is herself and she's got this big personality. Yeah, I still showed up with all of the things that this sandpaper couldn't smooth away. But it doesn't mean that I wasn't being sandpapered. I still had rough edges, but I kept trying to hide them to fit in because fundamentally I felt like I was never enough as I was. So I was trying to show up as myself while also pretending to be these other people. And that has been part of the joy and also part of the extreme difficulty of leaving that career behind, is peeling off all of those layers of artificiality that you learn to put on when you move into leadership in the corporate world. Some people might say that they don't do that, but I watch them. I see the masks that they put on, and I see how much of themselves that they bury, and I see how much we gaslight ourselves into still thinking we're being authentic and vulnerable. But it's a very polished vulnerability. It's a very artificial authenticity. It's be authentic in the right ways. And I felt like I'd been getting the message for years of be authentic, but not like that. I think you've seen that meme on TikTok. That one hits really close to home. Where am I going with this story? Yes, I do think it's important to be vulnerable about the challenges that we have. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but the biggest mistake was in not being true to myself. And when you dig past all the layers of this happened, why did that happen? Well, fundamentally, why did I do this or make this choice? The conclusion I've arrived at is that so much of it was driven by fear. The surface fears, the ones that are easy to say, is there's a fear of vulnerability. There's a fear of failure. Fundamentally, I was also afraid of losing my literal livelihood. After the divorce, I'm the sole supporter of myself. And so I made choices out of safety, out of a fear of losing that safety, out of a fear that if I didn't do these things, I wouldn't be enough on my own. This is the hardest part to say, which is that after a year of losing everything, my biggest learning is that safety is an illusion. So if we are twisting ourselves into pretzels and not being ourselves to make other people happy in order to feel safe and to feel like we're not going to lose our livelihoods, and in the end, that happens anyway, then why don't we just live the way we want? Why don't we truly channel our real selves and trust that that's going to be enough? And that if it's not enough, that we're going to be okay anyway. That's my big learning this year as I reflect back on everything that's happened and on everything that happened in the years leading up to that. Why bother being afraid? And why bother giving up myself? Because I gave up my whole life for work. Things I did without breaking any confidentiality agreements. There were certain periods in my career where I was doing incredibly amazing and critical work, and it was very fulfilling. And there were also periods in my life where I was growing so fast because of the pressure cooker that I was in that I stopped doing everything else. I stopped living and I lived only for work in order to have these amazing experiences, but also to protect myself from being back in the same situation I was when I was growing up. But in the end, what did I do? I chose safety in the corporate world, but really we're learning no corporate jobs are safe. It's actually really freeing to look back and to say, I made the choices I made. And some of those choices were driven by fear. I really loved what I was doing, but when I didn't anymore, I held on because I was afraid of changing. And I stopped doing things outside of work because I was afraid to try new things and to put myself out there and to be vulnerable, where if I'm vulnerable in my real life, that involves admitting that I had a deeply unhappy marriage for a few years. I stopped seeing my friends because I didn't want them to know that. I stopped doing other things because I was so deeply stressed out and unhappy about work, and I didn't want people to see that. And I stopped being truly vulnerable and authentic because I was punished for being myself. But what's so freeing about learning that about myself is that now I get to make different choices. I am armed with that knowledge. I know the circumstances under which I choose things that are harmful for me. And so going into 2025, having done this super deep self-work in 2024 about the year that's passed and the years that led up to it, I know what I'm going to choose differently in 2025. So yes, that is some intense self-work. Yes, a lot of it has to do with career. But what I don't want is for anybody to think that purpose has to do only with work, because it actually doesn't. Work may not be part of your purpose at all. And I think that the language and the conversation about purpose has gotten really skewed lately. And people are now pushing back against conversations about purpose because they're like, well, your purpose isn't just to work. Well, let's change this conversation. No, your purpose may not be just to work, but it doesn't mean purpose is a bad word. What happened was companies know that purpose is a huge motivator. So corporations have co-opted the language around purpose in order to motivate you to do what they want. And unfortunately, what that does is it dilutes it and it makes it a bad word. So you no longer think about what your purpose is for yourself, because corporations have made it all about work, but it isn't. And so I'm going to challenge everybody to sit down and be very honest with themselves about what their purpose is. And if you're like me, where your purpose is related to work, I'm also going to challenge you to make sure that you're not getting sucked into the same trap I did, which is giving yourself away to work. Don't give yourself away so cheaply, because when you're working for other people, they're benefiting from that. I know I say that all the time, but it's because looking back, I'm actually resentful at myself that I made that choice for so long when I could have been building something for myself, because I love working and being of service, and I was focusing so much on all the people I was helping that I forgot I wasn't helping me in the process. I lost me in the process, and I'm glad that the individuals I helped benefited, but who benefited financially? The companies I was working for. They're not the ones who trained me. They're not the ones who supported me. In fact, when I had a few hiccups, they discarded me. But it's up to you to know what your purpose is, and that might be related to some sort of art or creativity. Service doesn't always have to mean work. It might be related to relationships and enjoying the people around you. It might be related to spirituality, family. Only you know what your purpose is, but you know when you're not living it because you're unhappy and you feel out of alignment and you're not your best self. Because when you are working in your purpose, when you are living your purpose, you don't feel so disconnected and unhappy. So here's one of my other learnings. I did everything they wanted. I did everything they told me to do, and I still lost my job. If you can do everything perfectly and still not win, why not actually do what you want to be doing? And why not actually be yourself? Because as hard as I tried to be the person they wanted me to be, they still didn't like me. I would have been better off just being myself the whole time. And then if I'm in an environment that can't embrace that, then I need to be in a different environment. Here's the thing about fear. Fear is tricky. It doesn't always look like fear. It shows up as routine, dresses itself as comfort, and disguises itself in stability. But the truth is, your purpose lives outside your comfort zone. It's waiting just beyond the fear that's keeping you in place. I know I'm not alone. We all have moments where we wonder, what am I doing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I doing what really makes me happy? Or even, why am I doing things I don't like? It's just like when we talked about in procrastination. Maybe you're not motivated to do something because you don't actually want to do it. So should you be doing it? And it may not look like my story, where I gave everything to work and lost everything else. But what's your story? Where are you not living the way you want to live? And what's holding you back? Think about 2024. What do you wish you had done? And why didn't you do it? What was holding you back from having the year that you wanted to have? Or even, where did you spend time on things that didn't actually enrich your life? I'm asking these challenge questions because when I talk to people, and I mean really deeply talk to people, people are always telling me things they wish they were doing. I have a book I want to write. I have had so many people tell me that. Or someone might say, I've always wanted to take an acting class. I want to start doing voice work. I want to be in a play. Everybody's got dreams. And at some point, a lot of us decided that we had to set those dreams aside for this stability. And you know what I'm about to say, which is that that's actually a choice based on fear. You're afraid to chase the thing that you really want. You're afraid to get it started. So I'm going to ask you a challenge question, because people often ask, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I'm going to ask it a little bit differently. Who would you be if you weren't afraid of revealing who you are? Because that is one of our deepest internal fears, is revealing ourselves. And maybe you're feeling like that might have to do with shame. At the root of shame is fear. That's my first challenge question. My second challenge question is, what would you do if you weren't afraid of failing? Whatever failure means to you, what would you do if you weren't afraid of failing? I know these are big questions, but as Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So how can you build a life that is worth living? So really living your life with intention, living a life that serves your purpose, is living a life by design. You have to design the life that you want. And living by design isn't about living without fear. It's about knowing what your fears are and confronting them bravely and having the courage to live the life that you want. When you see your fears, it's important to acknowledge those fears are trying to keep you safe. It's also important to remember that safety is an illusion, and you were not put on this earth to live safely. You were put here to live authentically and live a full life. So this idea of life by design is personally what I'm carrying into 2025. It's about setting an intention for the life that I want to lead and then actually taking action to make that reality. When I took Brené Brown's Daring Leadership course, she has this quote that she put in the curriculum, and it is Joseph Campbell's statement that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And I loved that. But I spent years asking myself, what is the cave that I'm afraid to enter? Earlier I mentioned that some of the easy answers were vulnerability. I knew I was struggling with vulnerability. And so after I took that course, I spent years focusing on trying to confront this fear of vulnerability. It's a work in progress. But I knew that there were fears that I couldn't see yet. And so going back to how at the beginning of 2024, I lost some of the biggest things in my life, my marriage and this job that I was so passionate about, that actually helped me dig into these deeper fears, the ones I wasn't ready to confront beforehand. And there's a different version of this quote. And this one is, everything you desire lives on the other side of fear. That really helped me understand that the fear itself is the barrier, and that the life you want is out there. It's within your reach. And it involves getting outside of our comfort zones, because our comfort zones are trying to keep us safe. And that if we can identify what really matters, our purpose, our dreams, that can be the motivation we need to break through this fear, because what we want is on the other side. Our fears are exactly what are holding us back. And so it's so important to spend this time in deep reflection, truly understanding the different layers of fear that are holding us back from living the way we want to live and creating the life that we want and that we deserve. The things that matter most, the things that bring us closer to our purpose, are the things that are the hardest to face. It's true. It's important to then understand that fear is part of the journey. Fear shows up when we're working towards something meaningful. So going through this process can feel uncomfortable. That discomfort and that fear is actually a sign that you're on the right track, that you're working towards something meaningful. So when fear shows up like that, we have to ask ourselves, do we let it stop us, or are we going to work through it? In order to do that, and in order to design this life that you want to create, it's so important to leverage reflection as a tool, so you can see clearly how you haven't been aligned with your purpose and why. And reflection isn't just about looking back. It's about uncovering hard truths and learning what we need to carry forward. It's also about seeing fear for what it is, a sign that we're working towards something meaningful and a challenge that we need to work through. If you're feeling like it's time to reset and step into 2025 with more clarity and intention, consider joining our end-of-year reflection workshop. It's after the holidays and before the new year starts, which is a perfect time to sit down and reflect on the year past, or even further back if you need to, and make really intentional decisions about how you want to move forward forward in 2025. It's a guided session where I help you dig deep by asking some of these questions so that you can reflect and design the life that you want in 2025. Because 2025 is all about new year, new life. 2024 had its ups and downs. It certainly taught me a lot. And in 2025, I'm going to be rebuilding my life. I am going to be brave and step into everything I've been afraid of. Classes, hiking, group yoga, even putting myself out there again. Heck, I might even start dating. If it scares me, I'm doing it. But even more than that, I'm bringing back the parts of myself that I was punished for showing. The girl that cares too much. The girl who's too sensitive and wears her heart on her sleeve. The girl with the weird interests. Because I miss her. And if I learned anything from this year, it's that hiding who you are doesn't protect you. It just keeps you from living the life that you can love. So as we close out this year, ask yourself, what's on the other side of fear for you? What fears do you need to face in order to step closer to your purpose in 2025? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And even more, I'd love to take this journey together because I'll be showing you mine. I'll have a list of resources in the description below. In addition to the end of year reflection, remember we also have our productivity series, and going into 2025, this is going to be all about whole life productivity, about making sure that we're taking the steps we need to take to build lives that truly serve our purpose in 2025. And I really hope to see you there. Thank you so much.